The morning sun cast long shadows through the pine trees as I made my way along the familiar trail, my boots crunching softly against the frost-covered ground. Living alone in these mountains for the past 5 years had taught me to appreciate the subtle rhythms of nature, the way the light changed with the seasons, the patterns of animal tracks in fresh snow, the shifting songs of birds that marked the passage of time. But nothing in all those years could have prepared me for what I would discover that crisp autumn morning. I first noticed something was wrong when I spotted unusual broken branches along the ridge, far too high up to have been caused by local wildlife. The damage formed an eerily straight line down the mountainside, as if something had descended from above at an angle. My curiosity got the better of me, and I followed the trail of destruction, my heart beginning to race as I noticed an odd metallic gleam through the trees ahead. The wreckage was like nothing I'd ever seen before, scattered fragments of an iridescent material that seemed to shift colors in the morning light, too lightweight to be any metal I recognized. As I approached cautiously, my breath caught in my throat. There, half hidden beneath a sheet of the strange metal, was a hand. A delicate, humanoid hand with silvery skin that seemed to pulse with a faint inner light. Time seemed to slow as I carefully lifted the debris. Underneath lay what appeared to be a young woman, but everything about her was just slightly wrong in a way that made my skin prickle. Her features were too perfectly symmetrical. Her skin had that otherworldly silvery sheen, and most strikingly, there were intricate patterns of light flowing beneath her skin like luminescent blood through transparent veins. She was badly injured, with a deep gash across her abdomen that leaked a strange phosphorescent fluid. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, irregular movements. She was alive, but barely. As I knelt beside her, her eyes fluttered open, revealing irises that swirled with colors I had no words to describe. The look of pain and fear in those alien eyes was heartbreakingly human. I knew I should probably call someone, the authorities, the military, scientists, but something held me back. The nearest town was hours away, and she clearly needed immediate help. Besides, I'd seen enough movies to know how this usually played out for the alien. After 5 years of solitude, I'd learned to trust my instincts, and everything in me was screaming that I couldn't let her die here alone in the cold. With trembling hands, I checked her injuries more thoroughly. The gash seemed to be the worst of it, but there were other wounds I couldn't make sense of, places where her skin seemed to phase in and out of existence like a bad television signal. I had basic medical supplies back at my cabin, but would human medicine even work on her? Could she survive in our atmosphere? Was I doing more harm than good by moving her? Her hand suddenly gripped my wrist with surprising strength, those impossible eyes locking onto mine. Her lips moved, forming words in a language I couldn't understand, but the desperation in her voice needed no translation. Whatever she was, wherever she'd come from, she was asking for help. I made my decision. Carefully, I gathered her in my arms, trying to stabilize her head and neck. She was surprisingly light, as if her bones were hollow like a bird's. The luminescent fluid from her wound soaked into my jacket, warm against my chest. As I stood, I caught a glimpse of more wreckage through the trees, larger pieces of what must have been her craft. I'd have to come back later to hide it better. The trek back to my cabin had never seemed so long. Every step had to be carefully measured, every jolt minimized. Her breathing grew more labored, and the lights beneath her skin began to flicker like a failing fluorescent bulb. Twice I had to stop and check that she was still alive, her pulse a strange staccato rhythm against my fingers. What I didn't know then was that this moment would change everything, not just for me, but potentially for all of humanity. As I carried her through the silent forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking the knife's edge between an extraordinary discovery and an unthinkable tragedy. One solitary man, far from civilization, holding the life of an alien being in his hands. The question wasn't just whether I could save her, but whether I should try at all. By the time I reached my cabin, my arms were shaking from the strain, not from her weight. She couldn't have weighed more than 90 pounds, but from the tension of trying to keep her perfectly still. The luminescent fluid had stopped seeping from her wound, but I wasn't sure if that was good or bad. Her skin had taken on a worrying grayish tinge, and the flowing lights beneath had dimmed to barely visible pulses. I shouldered open the door, sending my cat Thomas scampering under the couch. The cabin wasn't much, just 2 rooms and a bathroom, but it was clean and warm. I converted the second bedroom into a workshop years ago, where I repaired broken electronics for the few neighbors scattered across these mountains. Now I carefully laid her on my workbench, pushing aside soldering irons and circuit boards. Under the bright workshop lights, I got my first proper look at her. She appeared to be young, maybe in her early 20s by human standards, though who knew how aging worked for her species. Her features were ethereal, high cheekbones, a delicate nose, and those strange, swirling eyes now half closed in pain. Her hair was like fine silver wire, forming intricate patterns against her scalp that I realized were actually part of her biology, not decorative. The wound in her abdomen was my immediate concern. The edges seemed to be shifting somehow, as if her flesh couldn't quite decide what dimension it wanted to exist in. I'd done some emergency medical training during my time in the military, but nothing had prepared me for this. The nearest hospital was 3 hours away, and even if I could get her there, I couldn't imagine how that would play out. Best case scenario, she'd end up in a government facility somewhere. Worst case, well, I'd seen enough sci-fi movies to know how humans typically react to anything alien and unknown. I started with what I knew: clean the wound, stop any bleeding, or whatever that glowing fluid was, and prevent infection. But as I reached for my first aid kit, her hand shot out and gripped my wrist again. Her eyes were fully open now, those swirling colors hypnotic. And no, human, medicine. She struggled to form the words, her voice like wind chimes in a storm. Need, repair, protocol. I stared at her in shock, not just because she could speak English, though that was surprising enough, but because her voice seemed to bypass my ears entirely, appearing directly in my mind. The sensation was disconcerting, like having someone else's thoughts inserted into my consciousness. Repair protocol? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I don't understand. What do you need? Her free hand moved to a spot just below her collarbone, where I noticed a slight raised pattern in her skin. She pressed it, and suddenly a holographic display appeared in the air above her chest. Symbols I didn't recognize scrolled past, too fast to follow. She tried to reach for them, but her hand shook with weakness. Help, she whispered /thought. Select pattern. I hesitated only a moment before reaching toward the floating symbols. To my surprise, they were tangible under my fingers, with a slight resistance like pushing through water. Following her weak gestures, I helped her navigate through what seemed to be some kind of medical interface. The symbols rearranged themselves into patterns that somehow felt right or wrong. I couldn't explain how I knew, but I could sense when we'd made a correct selection. As we worked, I found myself talking, mostly to fill the increasingly tense silence. I told her my name, explained where she was, assured her she was safe. I told her about my life in the mountains, about leaving civilization behind after my tour of duty left me with scars both visible and invisible. I talked about the peace I'd found in solitude, working with my hands, fixing broken things. She didn't respond, but I could feel her listening, her consciousness brushing against mine like a feather. Finally, the holographic display turned green and disappeared. A soft humming filled the room, and the lights beneath her skin began to pulse more strongly. The wound in her abdomen started to reconstruct itself is the only way I can describe it. Layer by layer, her tissue reformed, the strange dimensional shifting stabilizing until her skin was whole again. The process took about 20 minutes, during which she remained perfectly still, her eyes fixed on the cabin ceiling. When it was done, she let out a long breath, and the tension seemed to drain from her body. "Thank you," she said /thought, her mental voice stronger now. The repair protocol required assistance. Could not complete alone. "Who are you?" I asked, the question that had been burning in my mind since I found her. "What happened to you?" She turned those impossible eyes to me, and I felt a wave of sadness that wasn't my own. Was observer, sent to study. She paused, seeming to struggle with the concepts. Your world, interesting, unique, but others disagreed with mission. Attacked. Crashed. Her hand moved to her now healed abdomen. Damaged. I had so many questions, but I could see she was exhausting herself. You should rest, I said, standing to give her some water. We can talk more when you're stronger. No time, she said urgently, trying to sit up. They will come. Looking. Must hide. Her eyes darted to the windows, then back to me. Help me, please. Cannot let them find. She didn't finish the sentence. Her eyes rolled back, and she slumped against the workbench, unconscious. The lights under her skin continued to pulse, but slower now, like a heartbeat at rest. I quickly checked her vital signs, or what I assumed were vital signs, and found them stable. She seemed to be sleeping, her chest rising and falling in a regular rhythm. I stood there for a long moment, watching her breathe and trying to process everything that had happened in the last few hours. An alien, an actual, living alien was lying on my workbench. She was being hunted by others of her kind. She needed my help. And somehow, impossibly, I was now involved in what seemed to be some kind of intergalactic conflict. Thomas emerged from under the couch and wound around my legs, reminding me that life goes on, even in the face of the extraordinary. I needed to think, to plan. First, I had to better hide her ship's wreckage. Then I needed to secure the cabin somehow. If others were coming for her, we weren't safe, and I needed supplies, food, water, medical equipment. Did she even eat? Could she consume Earth food? As I made my mental list, I couldn't help but wonder what I'd gotten myself into. 5 years I'd spent building a quiet, solitary life, healing from my own wounds, finding peace in isolation. Now, in the span of a morning, everything had changed. I was harboring a fugitive alien, possibly making myself an enemy of her entire species. And yet, looking at her peaceful face, I knew I couldn't have done anything differently. I gathered blankets and carefully covered her, then began to prepare for whatever might come next. As I worked, I kept glancing at her, half expecting to wake up and find this had all been a dream. But she remained there, real and impossible, her silver skin glowing softly in the dim light of my workshop. Whatever happened next, I knew my life would never be the same. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the cabin's windows. Somewhere in the distance, I heard a sound like thunder, but the sky was clear. I moved to the window, scanning the horizon. Was that a flash of light in the clouds, or just my imagination? How much time did we have before they came looking for her? I checked the old rifle mounted above my fireplace, more of a hunting tool than a weapon, but it was all I had. Would it even work against whatever was coming? I thought about her words. They will come. Who were they? What did they want? And most importantly, why was she so afraid of them finding her? The question swirled in my mind as I began to fortify the cabin as best I could. All the while, she slept on, her gentle breathing a counterpoint to my racing thoughts. Only yesterday, I had been a simple hermit, fixing broken electronics and avoiding the complexities of human society. Now I was caught up in something far bigger than myself, protecting a mysterious alien visitor from unknown pursuers. As I worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The real challenge, and the real danger, was still to come. What I didn't know then was just how right I was and how unprepared I was for what would happen next. The day wore on, and I continued my preparations. Each passing hour felt like borrowed time, a countdown to something I couldn't quite grasp. The shadows lengthened across the cabin floor, and still she slept, her silver skin catching the last rays of sunlight like distant stars. In the gathering dusk, I sat beside her, watching the lights pulse beneath her skin and wondering what dreams filled an alien mind. I thought about the look in her eyes when she'd said they would come looking for her. There had been fear there, yes, but something else too. A determination, a sense of purpose. Whatever she was running from, whatever she was trying to protect, it was important enough to risk her life for. And now, for better or worse, it was important enough for me to risk mine too. The first stars were appearing in the darkening sky when I heard it. A low, pulsing hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Thomas arched his back and hissed, staring at the ceiling with wide eyes. And in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that our time had run out. They had found us. The humming grew louder, a deep vibration that made my teeth ache and the cabin's windows rattle in their frames. I quickly dimmed all the lights, though I doubted it would make much difference. If they had technology advanced enough for interstellar travel, they probably had ways of detecting us that I couldn't even imagine. The alien girl, the observer, as she'd called herself, stirred on the workbench, her eyes snapping open. The colors in them swirled faster now, like storm clouds gathering. "They're here," she said, thought, her mental voice tight with fear. She tried to sit up, but I gently pressed her back down. "Save your strength," I whispered, though I wasn't sure why I was whispering. "You're still healing." She gripped my arm, her fingers surprisingly strong. "Listen carefully. What comes next? You must understand." Her thoughts came faster now, more urgent. "I am not just observer. Am keeper. Guard something precious, dangerous in wrong hands." The humming changed pitch, becoming more focused. Through the window, I saw lights moving in the sky, too precise to be stars, too silent to be aircraft. They were searching, getting closer. "What are you guarding?" I asked, my mouth dry. "What do they want?" She pressed her hand to her chest, where the holographic interface had appeared earlier. "Knowledge. Data. Things your world not ready for. They want to use it. Change natural development. Interfere." She looked at me intently. "My mission. Observe only. Record. Understand. But they want to control. Shape. Profit." The lights were directly overhead now. The cabin's entire structure trembled with the force of their scanning beams, because that's what they had to be, I realized. They were systematically searching the area. I made a quick decision. "Can you walk?" "There's a cellar under the cabin. Root cellar, from when this place was first built, might shield us from their scans." She nodded, and I helped her to her feet. She was unsteady but managed to stay upright. I pulled back the old rug in the main room, revealing the trapdoor beneath. As I lifted it, Thomas darted past us into the darkness below. Smart cat. We had barely made it down the ladder when the first explosion lit up the night. Not my cabin. They'd found her ship's wreckage. The blast wave rattled preserved jars on the cellar's shelves. She stumbled, and I caught her, holding her close as dust rained down from the ceiling. "The data," she said urgently. "Must protect. Must transfer." She looked at me with those impossible eyes. "Will you accept?" "Accept what?" Before she could answer, heavy footsteps sounded above us. They moved with an unnatural rhythm, too precise to be human. I held my breath, pulling her deeper into the shadows behind some old crates. The cellar wasn't large, maybe 15 feet square, with earthen walls and a packed dirt floor. Root vegetables from my garden hung in mesh bags from the ceiling, and shelves lined the walls with preserves and emergency supplies. The footsteps stopped directly overhead. A beam of intense light pierced through the floorboards, sweeping back and forth. I could feel her trembling against me, her skin growing warmer, the lights beneath it pulsing faster. "Please," she thought whispered. "No time. Must transfer data. Keep safe. Will you accept?" The beam of light was moving toward the trapdoor. Whatever I was going to decide, I had to decide now. I looked at her, this impossible being who had literally fallen into my life, who had trusted me without hesitation. I thought about her words, about observing, about protecting natural development, about keeping something precious safe. "Yes," I said, "I accept." Her hand pressed against my chest, right above my heart. For a moment, nothing happened. Then pain exploded through my entire body, as if every cell was being rewritten. My vision went white, then black, then filled with colors I'd never seen before. Information flooded my mind. Images, concepts, understanding that felt both alien and somehow familiar. The trapdoor flew open with a crash. Light flooded the cellar, and through my altered vision, I saw them. Tall, mechanical figures that were neither fully robot nor fully organic. Their forms shifted and changed as I looked at them, as if they existed in multiple dimensions at once. But something was different now. I could see patterns in their movement, understand the energy fields surrounding them. Knowledge that wasn't mine told me their weaknesses, their blind spots. The observer's data transfer hadn't just given me information, it had changed how I perceived reality itself. She pushed me behind her, facing the entrance. Run, she thought to me. Through tunnel, behind shelves, lead to forest. I hadn't even known the tunnel existed, but now I could see it, a subtle distortion in the cellar wall that marked a hidden passage. I'm not leaving you, I started to say, but she cut me off. Must. Data more important. Must survive. Must stay hidden until. Her thought broke off as the first of the hunters reached the cellar entrance. They moved with liquid grace, their forms rippling like mercury. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. The observer raised her hands, and the air itself appeared to twist. The hunters' forms distorted, their dimensional shifting becoming erratic. She was buying me time, I realized, using the last of her strength to hold them back. Go! The force of her mental shout nearly knocked me over. Without meaning to, my body responded to her command, slipping behind the shelves and finding the hidden catch that opened the tunnel entrance. The last thing I saw as the passage sealed behind me was her silver form blazing with light, holding back creatures that shouldn't exist, giving me time to escape with knowledge that could change everything. I ran through the tunnel, my new senses guiding me through the darkness. Behind me, I felt rather than heard an explosion that shook the earth itself. Tears streamed down my face, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. She had given me a mission, entrusted me with something precious and dangerous. I had to survive, had to protect it, had to understand what I'd been given and why it was so important. The tunnel curved upward, and suddenly I was emerging into the forest, a quarter-mile from my cabin. The night sky was lit with strange lights, and that deep humming had become a piercing whine that made my enhanced senses scream in protest. I ran deeper into the woods, letting my new instincts guide me away from the searching beams. As I fled into the darkness, I became aware of the vastness of what had been transferred to me. Not just data, but understanding. Not just facts, but context. The observer hadn't just given me information about Earth. She'd given me the collected knowledge of countless worlds, countless civilizations, and somewhere in that vast library of information was something so important, so potentially world-changing, that she had died to keep it safe. The sounds of pursuit grew more distant as I moved deeper into the familiar woods that no longer looked familiar at all. My altered perception showed me things I'd never noticed before, patterns in the trees, energy flows in the earth, connections I'd never understood, and beneath it all, pulsing like a second heartbeat, was the weight of responsibility she'd given me. I was no longer just a solitary man hiding from the world. I was a keeper of secrets that could reshape humanity's understanding of everything. And somewhere out there, those hunters were still searching, still determined to find what she had hidden. The night grew deeper, and I kept moving, my mind racing with possibilities and dangers. This was only the beginning, I realized. The real challenge lay ahead, not just surviving, but understanding what I'd been given and deciding what to do with it. The observer had trusted me with this knowledge. Now I had to prove worthy of that trust. Above me, the stars seemed to pulse with new meaning, and I could have sworn I heard whispers in the darkness, echoes of ancient knowledge trying to make itself understood. The wind carried hints of voices that spoke in languages that had never been heard on Earth. And somewhere in the distance, I heard the hunters still searching. Dawn was approaching, and with it would come decisions I wasn't ready to make. But for now, I ran, carrying inside me secrets that could change everything, haunted by the sacrifice that had put them there. The first rays of dawn were breaking through the trees when the knowledge inside me began to change. It started as a subtle shift, like pieces of a puzzle rearranging themselves, but quickly grew into something more urgent. The information the observer had transferred wasn't just static data. It was alive, evolving, trying to tell me something. I stopped running and pressed my back against a massive pine tree, trying to catch my breath. The hunters' search patterns had shifted to the north, their dimensional signatures fading with distance. But something else was wrong. The knowledge inside me felt like it was burning, demanding attention. Images flashed through my mind: star maps, mathematical equations, and something else, a pattern I hadn't noticed before. She hadn't just been running from them. She'd been running to something. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The observer hadn't crashed by accident. This location, these mountains, even my cabin, they were all part of something larger. I closed my eyes and let the new understanding flow through me. Geographic coordinates overlaid themselves on my mental map of the area. Energy ley lines I'd never known existed pulsed beneath the forest floor. And there, about 3 miles east, was a point where everything converged. A sound like breaking glass filled the air, and my enhanced senses screamed a warning. I dove forward just as a beam of energy sliced through the tree where I'd been standing. They hadn't gone north at all. They'd been hurting me. 3 hunter forms emerged from the shadows, their liquid metal bodies rippling in the early morning light. But now, with the knowledge fully awakening inside me, I saw them differently. They weren't just hunters. They were failures, failed attempts to merge organic and mechanical life. They were searching for the observer's data not to suppress it, but to complete themselves. "The integration is unstable," one of them said in a voice that wasn't really a voice. "The human vessel cannot contain it. Surrender the data before the breakdown begins." Breakdown. I probed the knowledge inside me and found they were right. The information was too vast, too alien for a human mind to hold indefinitely. It was changing me just as I was changing it. The observer must have known this would happen, which meant this wasn't just a transfer. It was an evolution. I ran again, but with purpose now. The hunters followed, their energy weapons carving paths of dimensional distortion through the forest. But I could see the patterns now, could anticipate their attacks seconds before they happened. The knowledge inside me wasn't just information about the universe. It was information about them. The ground began to slope upward as I approached the convergence point. My body was changing, adapting to the alien data. I could feel new neural pathways forming, my perception expanding beyond normal human limits. The forest around me buzzed with energy that had always been there, but that humans had never been able to perceive. The hunters were falling behind, struggling to maintain their form as they entered the energy-rich convergence zone. "Stop," they called. "The data was never meant for organic integration. You don't understand what's happening." But I did understand finally. The observer hadn't just been studying Earth. She'd been preparing it, preparing us. And I wasn't just a convenient escape route. I was a test case. I reached the convergence point just as the sun crested the mountain. It was a small clearing, unremarkable except for the perfect circle of bare earth at its center. Ancient stone markers, weathered beyond recognition, stood at cardinal points around the circle. To normal human eyes, it would have looked like nothing more than an odd natural formation. But my eyes weren't entirely human anymore. The hunters burst into the clearing, their forms stabilizing as they tried to surround me. "The human body cannot survive full integration," one said. "Surrender now and we can still extract the data safely." I stepped into the circle's center, feeling energy surge through me. "You're right about one thing," I said, my voice resonating with harmonics I couldn't have produced hours ago. "I won't survive full integration. I'm not supposed to." The knowledge within me reached critical mass. The circle beneath my feet began to glow with symbols identical to the ones that had appeared above the observer's chest. The hunters raised their weapons, but they were too late. "She didn't give me the data to keep it safe," I said as the symbols began to spiral outward. "She gave it to me to give it to everyone." The sky above the clearing shimmered like a heat mirage. The hunters fired, their energy beams dissipating harmlessly against a field I hadn't created, but somehow knew how to control. The knowledge inside me had stopped burning. Now it was singing. "She wasn't just an observer," I continued, understanding flowing through me faster than I could process it. "And they weren't just hunting her." This was never about suppressing the data. It was about controlling who got to evolve first. The hunters' forms began to destabilize, their dimensional shifting becoming erratic as the energy field increased. One of them stepped forward, its liquid metal face forming something close to a human expression. "You don't understand the consequences. Humanity isn't ready. I smiled, feeling the last pieces of the puzzle fall into place. That's where you're wrong. The observer showed me everything. Every world, every civilization, every failed attempt at guided evolution. And you know what she discovered? The ones who were ready never thought they were. The ones who waited for permission never evolved at all. The circle beneath me erupted with light, and I felt myself beginning to change in ways I couldn't comprehend. The knowledge wasn't just inside me anymore. It was becoming me. And through me, it was about to change everything. The hunters raised their weapons for one final attack, but their forms were already beginning to dissolve in the energy field. Above us, the sky continued to shimmer, and I could feel millions of minds just beginning to stir, to sense something new at the edges of their consciousness. The observer hadn't died protecting the data. She had died delivering it. And now, as the energy field expanded and my human consciousness began to transform into something else entirely, I finally understood what she had meant by natural development. Sometimes, the most natural thing in the universe is change. The light from the circle reached the edges of the clearing, and I felt the last vestiges of my old self slipping away. The hunters were gone, their unstable forms scattered to quantum dust. The sky above was no longer the sky I had known, and the thoughts in my head were no longer entirely my own. The change was beginning, and this time no one would be able to stop it. In my last moments of purely human consciousness, I thought of the observer, of her sacrifice, of the trust she had placed in me, not to protect the knowledge, but to set it free. As the transformation took hold and the clearing erupted with impossible light, I sent a final thought to wherever she might be. I understand now, and I'm not afraid. The light consumed everything, and the world began to change. The light didn't fade, it transformed. As my consciousness expanded beyond human limits, I began to see what the observer had always known. The clearing wasn't just a convergence point of energy, it was a nexus of possibility, one of thousands scattered across Earth. Each nexus was a seed planted eons ago, waiting for the right moment, the right catalyst, to bloom. Time became fluid, stretching and compressing like waves on a quantum shore. I saw cities awakening, millions of minds simultaneously touching something vast and incomprehensible. The knowledge wasn't just spreading, it was adapting, evolving uniquely within each person it touched. Humanity wasn't becoming a hive mind. We were becoming a symphony, each consciousness a distinct note in an ever-expanding composition. But with this expanded awareness came a terrible understanding. The hunters hadn't been the real threat. They were just the visible edge of something much larger, much older. As my perception stretched across continents, I felt them stirring, massive crystalline structures buried deep beneath the Earth's crust, ancient machines left by beings who had tried this experiment before. They had been waiting, dormant, for this exact moment, not to stop the evolution, but to test it. The ground beneath the clearing began to crack as one of these structures activated, rising from its eons-long slumber. Crystal spires the size of skyscrapers erupted through the forest floor, their surfaces rippling with the same dimensional instability I had seen in the hunters. This was the true test, not whether humanity could evolve, but whether we could survive our evolution. The knowledge within me shifted again, and I understood what the observer had really done. She hadn't just given us the ability to evolve. She had given us the memory of every species that had tried before. Their successes, their failures, their sacrifices, all of it was encoded in the data, a roadmap written in the language of consciousness itself. The crystalline structure pulsed with energy, sending out waves that threatened to overwhelm the newly awakening minds across the planet. This was the filter, the challenge that had ended so many other civilizations' attempts at transcendence. But something was different this time. We weren't facing it alone. Through the expanded web of consciousness, I felt her presence. The observer hadn't died in that cellar. She had dispersed herself, seeding her own consciousness through the knowledge she had given me. Now she was awakening too, not as a single entity, but as a guide woven through the fabric of our collective awakening. Together, her thought whispered through millions of minds. This is how it was always meant to be. The crystalline machine launched its final test, a cascade of energy that should have fractured our emerging consciousness. But where other species had tried to resist it, tried to remain unchanged in the face of transformation, we did something unprecedented. We embraced it. Billions of minds, each evolving in their own unique way, turned toward the challenge not with fear, but with curiosity. The same human drive that had taken us from caves to the stars now turned itself toward this new frontier. The machine's energy, meant to disrupt, instead became part of our transformation. The crystal spires, programmed to judge, found themselves being reprogrammed by the very consciousness they were testing. This was humanity's gift, not just the ability to adapt, but to transform the very things that would transform us. The hunters had been wrong about one fundamental thing. Humanity hadn't been ready for this evolution, but our unreadiness, our uncertainty, our very doubts were what made us perfect for it. We didn't approach transcendence with confidence or certainty. We approached it like we had approached every great challenge in our history, with questions, with fear, with hope, and with an unshakable determination to understand. As the final waves of transformation swept across the planet, I felt my individual consciousness beginning to return, not diminished but transformed. The clearing was now a crater of crystalline structures, but they no longer pulsed with alien energy. They had become something new, something that was neither purely human nor purely alien. And then, in the silent aftermath of transformation, I heard her voice one last time, not in my mind, but carried on the quantum winds of our new reality. This was never about becoming something else, the observer's voice said. It was about becoming more of what you already were. The sun rose on a changed world, but not an unrecognizable one. We were still human, still individual, still ourselves, but we were also connected to something larger, something that bridged the gap between the cosmic and the intimate. The knowledge hadn't overwritten us, it had illuminated us. I looked down at my hands, still solid, still human, but now capable of touching realities I had never known existed. The forest around me buzzed with visible energy, each tree and plant pulsing with connections that had always been there, waiting to be seen. Thomas, my cat, emerged from the underbrush, his fur shimmering with patterns of consciousness that proved animals weren't just aware. They had their own vast networks of understanding that we were only now beginning to perceive. He looked at me with eyes that held both his familiar feline intelligence and something new, something that suggested that evolution hadn't just changed humanity. The crystalline structures now integrated into Earth's biosphere would stand as monuments to this moment, not as alien artifacts, but as bridges between what we had been and what we were becoming. They would remind us that evolution wasn't a destination but a journey, one that would continue as long as we had questions to ask and mysteries to explore. And somewhere, woven through the fabric of our new reality, the observer continued her mission, not as a solitary watcher, but as part of the very phenomenon she had come to study. She had given her life not to save humanity, but to become part of its story. As I stood in the transformed clearing, feeling the pulse of billions of awakening minds, I understood the final truth. The greatest achievements in our history had never come from following a predetermined path. They had come from taking steps into the unknown, from embracing the uncertainty of change, from daring to become something more than we already were. The story of humanity hadn't ended with this transformation. In many ways, it was just beginning. And as the first light of our new existence dawned over a changed world, I smiled, knowing that whatever came next, we would face it together, not as a single consciousness, but as a symphony of souls, each playing our own unique part in the cosmic dance of evolution. The real adventure was just beginning. Years have passed since that dawn when everything changed, though measuring time has become a different kind of exercise now. My cabin still stands, rebuilt and transformed like everything else, a bridge between what was and what is. Thomas, now well into his second decade but as spry as a kitten, still chases quantum butterflies through dimensions that overlap our own. The integration wasn't always smooth. There were those who struggled with the change, who fought against the expansion of their consciousness. But that too was part of the observer's gift, the freedom to choose how much we wanted to evolve, how far we wanted to reach. Some chose to maintain a mostly traditional human existence, touching the greater consciousness only lightly. Others dove deep into the new frontier of existence, becoming pioneers of realities we're still trying to understand. The crystalline structures that rose during our transformation have become gathering places, centers of learning where we explore our expanding potential. Children play among them, their minds naturally adapting to levels of reality that their parents still struggle to comprehend. They don't know a world without the shimmering veils of quantum energy or the gentle hum of collective consciousness at the edges of their awareness. We've learned we weren't the first civilization the observer's people had approached, but we were the first to succeed in this particular way. Other species had either rejected the change entirely or lost themselves in it, surrendering their individuality to the collective. Humanity found a middle path, maintaining our distinct selves while opening to something greater. The hunters, we discovered, were not villains but cautionary tales, products of a faction that had tried to force evolution along a predetermined path. Their fate taught us the importance of letting each consciousness find its own way forward. Some of their essence survived in the crystalline machines, and we're slowly helping them find a new kind of existence, one that honors both their original purpose and their potential for change. As for me, I've become something of a historian, recording our transformation from multiple perspectives, human, quantum, and dimensions we're still learning to name. My solitary nature hasn't changed so much as expanded. I still spend most of my time in the mountains, but now I can touch minds across the planet when I choose, sharing experiences and understanding with others who are exploring this new frontier of existence. The observer's presence remains, woven through the fabric of our collective experience. Sometimes, in quiet moments when the quantum winds are still, I feel her consciousness brush against mine, not as the dying being I found in the woods, but as something vast and gentle and proud of what we've become. She's still observing, still learning, still part of the grand experiment of existence. We've made contact with other civilizations now, not through traditional space travel, but through corridors of consciousness that span the galaxy. We've learned we're part of something even larger than we imagined, a cosmic tapestry of evolving awareness, each species finding its own path toward understanding. My old military wounds, both physical and psychological, have healed in ways I never expected. The expanded consciousness brought with it new ways of processing trauma, of understanding pain and growth. The solitude I once sought for healing has become a choice rather than a necessity, a way of being rather than a way of hiding. Thomas jumps onto my lap as I sit on the cabin's porch, watching the sunset paint quantum fires across the crystal spires. His purr resonates across multiple dimensions, a reminder that consciousness takes many forms, all of them valuable, all of them part of the greater story. The universe, we've learned, isn't just stranger than we imagined. It's stranger than we could have imagined. But that strangeness is part of its beauty, part of the endless dance of evolution and understanding that we've joined. And somewhere out there, other observers are approaching other worlds, offering the same choice we faced. Some will accept, some will refuse, some will find their own unique path forward. And we'll be here, adding our note to the cosmic symphony, proving that the most profound changes don't erase who we are. They reveal who we've always had the potential to become. The story continues, as all good stories do, not with an ending, but with a new beginning. And in the quantum winds that sweep across our transformed world, I swear I can hear the observer's gentle laughter, reminding us that the greatest adventures are the ones we could never have predicted.